to record. It's like I had mentioned to Steve, as long as it's okay with you, I'll use some audio or some quotes for the preview for the Buffalo show for the Beat tour. And then for the audio, we'll just post that online if you don't mind.
Whatever you like.
How much time do you have?
20 minutes be all right?
20 minutes be perfect.
Great.
All right. Just want to get started. You're one of those people that you get interviewed so much that I think it's a challenge to come up with questions that you haven't been asked. And this one just sort of popped into my head as I was doing some notes and prepping. I grew up in Rochester, so we all, you're royalty in Rochester, and obviously for playing the bass. But I photography is really amazing, and I'm wondering if it's with you being from the going to the Eastman School of Music, if being in Rochester around George Eastman and the photography, if that's what inspired you to pick up photography, or if it just was kind of happenstance.
That's a very good question. I've never been asked that. Thinking back, the first thing that strikes me is, of course, you're talking about when there was a thing called film
Yes.
that some of us remember, and I for sure was shooting then. But I got to say, not really. You don't go to Rochester and encounter Eastman Kodak and become a photographer. It's kind of a different brain part. But Kodak, of course, and Xerox, by the way, were a major part of the financial scene in Rochester when I was there. But that had nothing to do with me picking up the camera, which I had done before. I would say then and for many years afterwards that I was a passionate amateur photographer, that I'm attracted to it and kept trying to get better at it. But through the years, I realized that I'm in a unique position because I'm on stage so much, and I can take pictures not only behind the scenes, but even more importantly, of the audience and what they look like from stage. So I realized I have a lucky positioning in my travels, and because I like cameras and like photography, I try to get better at it. I actually made a conscious effort not to become professional level, but to get my act together and get better equipment, and gradually through I would say my technique is I take so many darn pictures that even if 1 out of 50 is good, then I have a whole bunch of good ones.
I realized I forgot to start the video. Here you can see my face now, but yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I do concert photography as part of the reviews and everything like that, and I found that the technical aspect, and I actually learned this from Graham Nash, who had a speech at Eastman School of Music. He talked about being in love with your subject, and I think that comes through in a great photographer's work. That it's not always about the technique; sometimes it's about the love, and to some degree that has to be true with your bass playing too. I mean, you have to be in love with the instrument and what it can do to really be proficient at it.
Well, I do. Bass playing is what I do. The photography is a sideline, and I've certainly loved playing the bass. Really, no different than when I was 10 years old and picked up the bass. Gosh knows how many years ago that was. And I keep doing it. And on the road, especially on this road trip is 65 shows by bus. So it's some significant traveling. What gets you through it is those 2 hours a night that you're playing your music and you're loving the other musicians. You're loving playing the bass in my case. And that's more than enough to get me through whatever the other 22 hours might throw at me for hurdles. So yes, you're exactly right that you got to love what you're doing and taking photographs. I never thought about loving my subject, but I guess I do. I just kind of look at the situation on the road with the photographer's eye and then try to capture it. And gradually through the years, I learned what my equipment will do and how I can fix things later if necessary, and try to capture the moment, because the moment is a really significant part. If you're talking about a rock show, if you've photographed being in charge of the technical aspect, I'm not good at that, and it's pretty tricky because I don't have to tell you, the lighting is different on your subject than it is on the rest of the stage, and you don't want to blow it out and have a useless photo, which I have about 30 of from last night's show in Las Vegas. I have 30 where I left I shoot half the show with the camera on automatic and it blew out the subject, and fortunately I shot the other half on manual and got some good pictures.
Yeah, you were quite the challenge to shoot on the Peter Gabriel tour. I mean, Peter was in some beautiful white light, but it was such a visually stunning show. And usually we get the first three, and But I wanted to make sure I got some shots of you, but the lighting wasn't ideal, as you said. I mean, a lot of times people think it's just like, oh, selfie, let's get her done. But there's a
Yeah,
lot more
yep,
to
yep.
it. So,
There is a lot
um,
to it. And
so
by the way,
I
if you saw that IO tour, it was fantastic. It was moving to the band as well as to the audience. So anybody who's seen it, I feel like I have something akin with them because I was also very moved by Peter and his show every night.
I can't even imagine it from your perspective. I mean, from my perspective, you're right. I mean, the first time I saw Peter was on the security tour. You were with him on that.
Yeah,
You're playing like little smaller arenas, and it was such a great show. But every tour he's done is it's so theatrical, it's so beautiful, but his voice is otherworldly, and he's taken very good care of his voice over the years.
amazing. I mean, his voice is
Yeah,
amazing. Yep, yep.
yeah. So I don't know, I've interviewed Adrian a few times about King Crimson and his King Crimson era, and I wonder what your take is on it. I imagine it's going to be similar, but if I thought it would entirely, I wouldn't ask the question. When he originally joined the band, and I assume this is the same time that you did, he said that the working name was Discipline and that he really was opposed to the name King Crimson because you would be compared to the previous King Crimson lineups. This created some issues in terms with the early shows, and I guess in some ways he felt like there was a bait and switch, and that first tour was kind of difficult for him. Was that the same case with you, or do you have a different recollection or memory?
Not the same case with me. No, I joined the band to be in the band, and on the first tour it was called Discipline. And then when somebody suggested changing the name to King Crimson, I was fine with that. So much simpler situation for me. Less of a story.
Well, less of a story. And I mean, you really, in terms of just the guy that has the thread through the band, other than Robert Fripp. I mean, obviously the very first lineup it was very fluid, and strangely enough, off a beaten trail, I interviewed Greg Lake before he passed away, and he said
Right.
about King Crimson that he was upset when he left King Crimson, and then they continued on without him. That's why he called the next band Emerson, Lake and Palmer, so that they couldn't just take the name from him when he left.
Interesting. Wow, that's funny.
So, in terms of you've toured recently with Robert, and now you're on the road with Steve Vai. I haven't seen the show yet. I'm looking forward to seeing it in Buffalo. I was hoping to catch it in Rochester, but the stars didn't quite align. Um, what was the biggest difference in terms of Steve's approach to the material as opposed to Robert? Because from my perspective, they're very different guitarists.
Uh, yes, they're very different guitarists for sure. They're completely different. Steve has learned Robert's parts and he's playing them with his interpretation and he's varying from them a lot. So it's just completely different.
And in terms of you, I mean, this is something that I assume that you're just able to kind of flow with, right? Because you play with a lot of people.
Uh, yeah, I don't really know if you're asking a question, but I'm very happy in the band. We're really excited. We were enjoying the show. We've already done a whole lot of shows. I'm not sure, 40 shows maybe. The band is exciting. The music's exciting, and we feel like we've taken some classic music from the 80s that Adrian and I, yes, already knew, and we're taking it where this band takes it, and with Danny and Steve, the new players, quote unquote, attacking it in different ways. It's a different kind of band, and the feel is different. The good thing is the audiences are liking it as much as it seems, from what I read, as much as we do, and we're very excited and really thrilled to be doing this tour, and glad that it's as long a tour and as comprehensive a tour as it is.
Was there anything that you guys attempted to do and you just couldn't? And maybe,
That's a good question. There's a good chance that that would have been the case, but not really. Adrian picked
wow,
the pieces from that era, from those three albums that he would like to do. We learned them all, and we're doing them all the pieces he chose, which is most of the pieces from those three albums.
awesome. Now it said you said about 20 minutes, so I'm about 7 minutes in, but I like to with artists sometimes just show them some records that either they were on or not. These are all ones that you were on, and I wondered if maybe you could just give me a quick recollection or maybe an initial thought. I'm a record collector and have a lot of them here. This one,
Wow.
if I remember correctly, is this where the Funk Fingers was from these
Uh,
sessions?
is that so? I can't tell
This
from
is
what
so,
you're saying.
yes.
Yeah, so it was subsequent to that, but on the piece Big Time, I asked Jerry Marotta, the drummer, to drum with his drumsticks on the bass strings while I fingered the left hand. And on the tour the following year, 86, I was trying to do that when Peter Gabriel himself suggested at a sound check that I put the drumsticks on my fingers, chop them down and put them on my fingers, which I did, and I named them Funk Fingers, and I'm playing them to this very day, including literally today at tonight's show. I'll be playing them on a couple of pieces.
So you wouldn't have used those on the initial King Crimson tour. So this would be the first time you're using them on this material?
Oh, I've played King Crimson material a lot since '81. I
Well,
don't know
I
what
should
you're
say
asking.
on the initial tours of the for the three records, you weren't using the Funk Fingers. Did that predate then?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
those were in the '80s, and the Funk Fingers date from 1986, really.
All right. So this one is an obvious choice. You had three records you said during this era that you're pulling songs
Yeah.
from. Why did you choose Beat as far as the name of the band as opposed to Three of a Perfect Pair? I know there's four guys, but or Discipline.
It was Robert Fripp who chose that. Adrian called Robert and asked him how he felt about us doing this tour. Robert was totally positive about it and suggested that we call it the Beat Tour.
Oh, awesome. Is Robert? Does Robert have plans to come out and see any of the shows or
Not that I know of.
no? One that I've always found very interesting, and hopefully there's some stories behind this one.
Anders and Roofer Wakeman and Howe, I was really thrilled to be asked to be in that band. It was sort of yes, but not yes. And also there was the daunting aspect, especially in the live show, of playing Chris Squire's iconic bass parts. So I tackled that in my own way, which is try to be true to what's iconic about the part, but to also make it my own part. So Chris notably played with pick a lot, and I thought about practicing with my pick technique, which isn't too good, and I decided instead to devote the time to working on my Funk Fingers technique. So I played a lot of that tour, not the album you're holding up, but the tour. I did a lot of it with Funk Fingers, and I didn't try to get Chris's sound, but I got something somewhat reminiscent of it. And on the album, great players and a great experience. I think we did it in the recording in Montserrat, the studio that's no longer there. So it was special in that way too, and memorable.
It sounds like your approach to Chris's parts is similar to Steve's approach to Robert's parts.
I haven't asked Steve his mindset on Robert's parts, but I have a lot of experience touring with King Crimson and playing the classic Crimson material from before my time, from the '70s, and John Wetton's bass parts, which I love, and
Right.
it really is a different kind of challenge than playing the bass and playing the music well, to tackle how to approach a classic bass part that's already ingrained in the piece. But we're not a cover band, and we're not there to just exactly play things the way they used to be.
Yeah, I listened to an interview, I believe it was with Bob Lefsetz, where you talked about John Wetton's playing. And I had to agree with you so much. A lot of people just think of him as, the voice of Asia because that was his commercial peak. And obviously they respect him for his time in Crimson, for his vocals and everything. But his bass parts, as you mentioned, were just iconic.
Sure. Well, it is a truism that when a great bass player is also a great singer, he tends to get much more attention. Frankly, he or she tends to get much more attention as a singer than as a bass player, like Sting, Paul McCartney, uh, and who else was like on a list with that? Anyway, that's two.
All right. This one, I was kind of surprised that you were on. So this session,
Um,
Richard Thompson's Amnesia.
Richard Thompson, yeah, he's great. He's a great singer, songwriter, and I don't remember the particular album, but as I often am, I was grateful to get a chance to do a play on some of his material. Great guy too, but really a thrill. Frankly, I haven't listened to that record in a while, and I should go back and listen to it. I don't have any stories or anything from the sessions, but it was a pleasure to play music with the guy.
Yeah, he's just an incredible artist. I saw him at a place that I used to work at in Rochester, if you remember, called the Red Creek. And yeah, he was just an absolute joy to see in concert, and just such a super talented guitarist, as you know. This is one you get asked about a lot. Actually, the last time I interviewed you, you shared a lot of great stuff. So, fantasy.
Double Fantasy. Yeah, it was I gather you want just a short something, say something about the album. Is that what you were after here?
We've got some time, or whatever you want to share. I mean, I know that this is a very
So it
emotional
was a couple of
session.
weeks in the studio, and it was really special. I was honored to be asked to be the bass player who did the session. It could have been any of a number, probably 100 or 1,000 bass players could have had a great time playing on the music, and it was very special. Of course, it was a short experience, cut short by the tragedy of his death, and there was going to be a world tour that never happened. And it's a fond memory, and as often is the case with me, I was lucky to be the one who was called for it. And I have often revisited that music and heard it and played it actually live since then, but really special music.
Yeah, and it's when John was tragically murdered, a lot of people went out and purchased this record, and so it became, went high up on the charts. But as I've revisited it years later, I think, man, whether or not he had been murdered, this album I think should have done very well. And I think Yoko's material on here is very underrated. I mean, it's incredibly listenable, and just the interplay between John and Yoko in terms of the flow and everything. It's just, this is a real piece of art. I mean, it's just a beautiful record.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you get a chance to still go back and listen to it. This is a not only a sentimental favorite. You'll see it's pretty up, but man, I love this record as well. See if you got any memories of this one. Chuck
Oh,
Mangione.
Chuck Mangione. Yeah. Well, some of my musical training came from my 6 years in Rochester. A lot of my musical training, not only at the Eastman School of Music and playing in the Rochester Philharmonic, but playing with Gap Mangione in his trio and playing with Chuck Mangione in his quartet. So great memories there. And I was lucky. It was my first trip to Europe was with Chuck Mangione, and a great introduction to many sides of music that served me well through the years after I left Rochester.
Are you still in touch with? I know Gap still plays out. I don't think Chuck has been very active since the airplane tragedy that took some of his band members, and I think Jerry Nywood was probably a guy that you knew as well.
I am still in touch with Gap. Yes.
Have you heard from Chuck at all, or I mean, he just said he just seems to have kind of.
I sometimes see him. I don't email him or anything. We're not in touch in that way. I sometimes see him when I'm in Rochester, and I'm lucky that I do play Rochester at least once a year. It's not a planned schedule, but when I'm there, I sometimes see him. I usually see Gap. He comes to the show. I saw him just really a few weeks ago when I played Rochester,
Yeah,
and he's doing
I
very well. And I'm glad to see that he's still playing.
he was at my on a completely side note, my wife and I's first date was at a Gap Mangio concert in Rochester at a place called the Woodcliff Inn. So a very sentimental guy, that Gap Mangio. Got time for just a couple of more. We're at about 3:16. Any memories you'd like to share? I know you're from the Woodstock Kingston area. I'm a big Todd Rundgren fan. I know you toured with Todd, but the person I want to ask about is actually Jesse Gress. I mean, Jesse passed away a couple of years ago. Just an incredibly talented guitarist and very nice guy. I mean, do you have some fond memories that maybe you could share about playing with Jesse, or maybe how you guys met?
I played with him a lot in different configurations, including with Todd. And Jesse was a valuable member of my band called Tony Levin Band. We toured a lot together. We recorded a lot together. He's on a lot of my solo albums. Speaking of which, you didn't ask about my new solo album. I'd like to just mention that it's called "Bringing It Down to the Bass," and just out and coming out. We both like record stores and vinyl, and
Yep.
the the special what's it called, the record store day is coming up soon, and there's a special edition of finally a double vinyl edition of my record. I'm very happy about that. And the one thing I would say about the record, aside from the name of it, bringing it down to the bass, is that it's I invited a lot of my friends who are great musicians, not just a few, but really a kind of cast of well-known players, and it's their playing that on the record that I think is very special and makes it worth a listen. Thanks.
Oh, I promise you it was on the list as my last question I was going to ask. In fact, I believe if my research and memory is correct, you sing on this particular record. Is that correct?
Yeah, my singing is usually shouting words, and these are mostly instrumental. Excuse me, they're mostly instrumentals, and there are some where I shout words and sometimes almost poetically, I think. But I made an exception. I made a lot of exceptions on this album. I allowed myself 14 tracks, which is more than usual, and a couple of them are only vocal. There's a barbershop quartet about the experience of turning over a vinyl record, about getting up. It's called Side B, Turn It Over.
Nice.
That's a barbershop quartet. And then I wrote during the lockdown year, when I was kind of semi-insane, like everybody, with no work and no way to play, I wrote a choral piece using only the names of drummers I had played with through the years, but I've been at it a lot of years, a lot of drummers, and
Wow.
it's a long piece. And I kind of made a almost classical composition of choruses, a chorus of my voice, overdubbed about 18 voices, singing names of a whole lot of drummers.
Yeah, and my son's a drummer, and he he's 30 years old. He's been playing around the area, Buffalo area, for a while, and I mean he just says like he says the bass player and the drummer, the relationship between them is just crucial, and then even to some degree it has to work on a personal level. It has to go beyond the music. I mean, is that your experience as well, working with so many drummers?
Uh, it's not the drummers that I work with, but yes, bass players and drummers who are what's called the rhythm section of a band have a relationship and a way they listen to the music a little different than the other guys in the band. And when the chemistry is right, it's really special. And the chemistry usually becomes right when guys are together in a band for a long time. So it's a special relationship. I'm very lucky to have had so many of these special relationships, and in a way, it was my tribute to that factor that you mentioned that made me tackle doing that very piece.
Yeah, I mean, you to me, I think Levin and Gad. I mean, as a Rochester guy, that's always been such a special and magical combination. Again, going back to the Chuck Mangione concert together when you guys played together, just pretty amazing.
Well, I was very lucky to be in school with Steve. I wasn't much,
Yeah.
hardly had played jazz at all, let alone rock in those days. We were young, and Steve was already very good at both. So I was very lucky to play with him and let him mentor me in a way, in a quiet way, about my jazz playing.
Yeah, and you guys were such an important part of Rochester history and my
Mhm.
growing up, and it's always this is the second time interviewing you, and just such an honor. I really feel blessed to be able. We'll
Thank
wrap
you.
it up with. I know you mentioned the solo album, but I believe you're selling some photo books as well. Maybe if you want to talk about that stuff on your website, and maybe some other projects that are coming up after Beat, where you probably will be touring with your brother and things like that. I would imagine.
Yeah, next year it's now that I'm immersed in this tour, which is taking me almost until Christmas, it's hard to focus much on next year. But yes, there will be some Levin Brothers shows. We were just in Rochester for the wonderful jazz festival there, but I'm not sure exactly where. And there will be Stickmen touring, and I'm not sure exactly where. And beyond that, I'm not sure. I haven't heard from Peter Gabriel, although I hope he has plans. There can't be much of a tour planned, or I would have heard about it from now. I'm very lucky to be on this Beat tour, really enjoying it, and the the plans for next year will happen probably in the next month or two, but I don't know what they are. This is typical for freelance musicians, by the way.
Yeah, when you talked about making the solo album and how like during the lockdown you were going crazy, I can only imagine to somebody like you who's just so immersed in the process of both recording, touring, whatever, that must have been a very, very difficult period
Uh,
for you,
well, not as difficult for me as for many others, but it was
right?
very different, like it was for all of us. We all have went through, oh, here's something new. I haven't been in this life situation before, and one of my outlets, one that I'm lucky to have, is I write music when I'm trying to process things.
Yeah, because it's got to be hard to write it when you're on the road all the time. So
Mhm.
Well, I will let you enjoy Las Vegas. And again, Tony, thank you so much. Steve Karras, who works with you, it's just a wonderful human being. I'm
He
always
is.
happy when he's able to hook up. I think he lives out that way, doesn't he?
I'm not sure where he lives.
Oh, okay. I thought he lived out in Vegas, but I don't know. A lot of our stuff is done via email or phone. But
Sure.
either
And
way,
anyway, I'm in San Diego.
you're in San Diego. Okay, you were in Las Vegas yesterday. I thought he emailed me that you
Yeah,
were
that
going to
was
be in
yesterday.
Los Angeles tonight.
I
So
was. I was
awesome.
even this morning. I was in Las Vegas. Very nice to speak to you. Be well.
Pleasure's mine. I will see you in Buffalo, and hopefully by then the Buffalo Bills will still have not lost any games. So, well, they've
Excellent.
lost a couple this year, but we're doing well. So, take it
Take care,
easy.
man.
Thanks, Steve or
Sure.
Tony. Sorry. Bye bye.
Bye bye.